Jean Meslier, Frenchman born in 1664, began learning Latin from a neighborhood priest and eventually joined a seminary and took what they called holy orders and became a priest in Champagne, France. He was an unremarkable, he didn't stand out at all as a priest. He worked hard, he did the ceremonies, he worked without complaint for 40 years. He actually lived very, very frugally and gave most of what he owned to the poor. When he died in 1729, among his possessions was found a manuscript. Now this will make Janice feel a little better. It was a 633-page manuscript, which would have taken some time. How many are you? Oh, well, you're all... 633-page manuscript he had written during his lifetime. So he took a lifetime to write it. And he called it his testament, and he addressed it to his parishioners. And in these 633 pages, he confessed that he had not believed a word of what he was teaching, of the church's teaching to them. He went through 40 years trying to do... Now, in the Testament, it also says he became a priest because he wanted to please his father, which often leads us, you know that. He also, which I'll let you look up online, he devised a punishment for the teachers and pope and priests that had made that teaching be there. But it's too gruesome before lunch, so I won't tell you what he imagined was fitting, but he said it wasn't out of revenge, but out of a love of justice and truth. So this fella spent 40 years doing what he thought was pleasing and not what he really was and felt. And I've read that many times in many different books. And the reason, of course, in those days, if you were that heretical, you were probably put to death. So his fear was founded. I mean, most of us haven't faced that type of threat. Cowardice, maybe, but understandable. Prudence, perhaps, but very, very difficult. And I was translating that into all other lifestyles and beliefs that couldn't be themselves in life for whatever reason. And sometimes it's the pleasing the parents or the church or the whoever, the workplace or whatever. Whatever is different from what you feel will be accepted, you hide from the light. Now, last week we talked about light in various ways, about knowing and getting to know, and knowing that even when you know it's provisional, and keeping open to learning. And I'll just bring one little image to you because I'm going to expand on it. We talked about, I brought a little passage from Immanuel Kant about his essay called What is Enlightenment, and we went into that a bit. And one of his mottos is, dare to know, dare to be open to learning something, dare to be wise, and think for yourself, which Jean Meslier had done, but couldn't bring it up open. And thinking for yourself is splendid, and I envision that as you're on a dark country road with just your headlights. So all you've got is your headlights. And it can work, and they can get you places. But then I had us drive into a town where the street lights were lighting, and we could see more. We could still think for ourselves, but we see more when we're open to what the community brings of its light to us. I think like that. So last week was Immanuel Kant, and this week is a bit of Jean-Paul Sartre, whose life you may or may not want to look up, but his thoughts. I tell you, I quoted somebody last week, and I can't remember who it was. And I was told later the fellow had a really difficult life and ended his life. And we take an approach here that it doesn't matter how someone has failed or succeeded. If what they've said is wise, we embrace it, and it's good. I think it was... yeah, thank you. Over there in the black sweater, Kurt Cobain. And he said, the sun has gone down, but I have a light. And evidently he didn't feel that at the end of his life, but at one point he had that, and he shared it with us. So a little bit of Jean-Paul Sartre, as brought to us by Ronald Aronson, who is a humanist teacher, in his book, Living Without God. And I'm just going to share this with you quickly. There are things to know. So why do people not often exercise the capacity they have to know them? What does it take to know? Knowing is a choice, often a hard one. Harder because we come to realize how contingent and fallible knowledge is. In Jean-Paul Sartre's book, Truth and Essence, he distinguishes the decision to ignore reality and the decision to reveal it. And he uses the French word ignorer, which carries two meanings, both of which we specialize in. One is just simply to not know. I think I just split an infinitive. Not to know. Not to know. Ignore, not to know something. I am ignorant of that fact. I do not know it. The other is to choose to not know. It's there to know, but I choose not to know it. So there's one image that has not knowing, and the other is ignoring knowledge. And we've fused those two meanings together and turned it into somewhat of an insult when we call someone ignorant, which we don't. But the meaning in that is, you should know this and you're not acting on it. So that's an idea from him about choosing not to know something. Sartre makes the act of knowing into an act of the will, a free decision, and because it's a free decision, it's a moral issue for him. To choose not to know, and this is Sartre's one of his famous phrases, is to engage in bad faith. Bad faith with the world. If I choose to close my eyes to something true, I'm not acting in good faith with the world of reality. We ignore and reject a situation for many, many reasons. Sometimes because it's too troubling to hear, too difficult, I don't know what I would do about it, it's about me and I really don't want to hear it, all sorts of reasons. You often hear the phrase, someone will bring something to light and the person will say, I wish you hadn't told me that. I wish you hadn't told me that. There's also a phrase I use a great deal, and it goes like this. I know. That usually succeeds Greta saying, but I told you already 4 times, and still you didn't do it right. And I say, I know, 4 or 5 times. And really, am I saying I knew, but I chose not to? Or I should have remembered I know. Did I know? Did I know it and act on it? Did I act in good faith with it? No, I probably forgot. Didn't forget the bowls, I just got the wrong bowls. To shed light on something. The word light appears in so many of our phrases. And I'm going to take you, that was the 1700s, 1600s. I'm going to take you to the 1900s, into a room where something was being brought to light and being reacted to quite dramatically. And we have no feeling for that in some of our issues, but there are places in this world where the issue of evolution is still a pretty dynamically, radically difficult topic. And it's bandied back and forth. But I'm taking you back to shortly after Darwin and after a great deal of struggle about coming forward with this, for one of the same reasons Meslier was quiet, was what will happen to me if I pronounce this, because it seems to go against the teaching of the church at the time, and I don't wish to do that because back then it was troublesome. And here on this globe, it is still troublesome to go against an authority of that sort. So we go into the room, and Darwin's bulldog, his name is Thomas Huxley. Relation, yes, Huxley. And so he often was the promoter of Darwin's ideas. He was the speaker and an orator type. Now here's someone's rendition of what happened in that room when it was brought to the authorities. I was happy enough to be present on the memorable occasion at Oxford when Mr. Huxley bearded Bishop Wilberforce. There were so many of us that were eager to hear that we had to adjourn to the great library of the museum. I can still hear the American accents of Dr. Draper's opening address when he asked, "Are we but fortuitous concourse of atoms? Bah, no." And his discourse, I seem to remember, was somewhat dry. These are editorial comments in the... Then the bishop rose, and in a light, scoffing tone, he assured us that there was nothing in the idea of evolution. Rock pigeons were what rock pigeons always had been. And then turning to his antagonist with a smiling insolence, he begged to know, was it through his grandfather or his grandmother that Huxley claimed his descent from a monkey? On this, Mr. Huxley slowly and deliberately rose. A slight, tall figure, stern and pale, very quiet and very grave, he stood before us and spoke those tremendous words, words which no one seems sure of now, nor, I think, could remember just after they were spoken, for their meaning took away our breath, though it left us in no doubt as to what it was. He spake that he was not ashamed to have a monkey as his ancestor, but he would be greatly ashamed to be connected with someone who used great gifts to obscure the truth. No one doubted his meaning, and the effect was tremendous. One lady fainted, and I jumped right out of my seat. Light, shedding light when the light is not guaranteed to be welcome. That has happened in church, that has happened in government, that has happened in your family, that has happened at Christmas, that happens all over the place. Like for right now, if we put one of these cartoon blurb things above all of your heads, there'd be some of us are kind of pulling down some of those sentences and saying, no, I really wouldn't rather everybody. And that's absolutely fine and right. I mean, being a courteous person isn't always having courteous thoughts. It's expressing courtesy despite what might be in your balloon at the time. And also speaking sometimes the truth you have to speak from that balloon in a way, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So the light. To see something in a new light, common phrase, to see something in a new light. An Irish proverb, firelight, which some of you were using in the blackout time. Firelight will not let you read fine stories, but it's warm and you won't see the dust on the floor. Seeing something in a new light, seeing it differently. So that's a pragmatic use for a dimmer light, but seeing something in a new light can also be a very astonishing, illuminating experience. It changes things, sometimes radically. What is true by lamplight is not always the same by sunlight. I thought something, and then more light was added, and I saw it differently. I was about 20 in university, and I needed a summer job, and they had them all posted on the university bulletin board. And I picked this number of a place in downtown Toronto that needed typing up their fundraising things. And I phoned them up. And this absolutely gorgeous woman's voice, oh my, I could barely speak. She was just so lovely on the phone. I'd love to work for this. I thought, oh, this will be amazing. I'll do anything for her. And so I took the job on the phone. It was great. So I arranged a meeting and went to meet in the office and knocked on the open door. She was 62. With a lovely voice, absolutely lovely voice. But it did alter the way I looked at this job. It wasn't going to be quite the treat that I thought. Actually, in the end, we loved each other. It was wonderful. But I saw it in a new light as soon as I walked in that room. Things adjusted. Joseph Joubert, who valued even his ill health because it gave him subtlety to his thinking, said that comment about what is true by lamplight is not always true by sunlight. So seeing something in a new light. And then there's being a light. And I'm going to approach this in a very particular way. Reflecting to someone else something they need to know. So if we were to look in your blurbs above your head right now, I'll bet you there's people's names up there that you know need to know something that they're not knowing yet. They're not doing it right. They're not responding well, that you know they need to know. And you know the kind of phrases you've heard in your life when someone approaches you and says, I don't mean to criticize, but you know what's coming. Or, I'm saying this for your own good. Or, no one wants to tell you this, but I'm going to. So bringing light to someone. And sometimes the light can be an illuminator, and sometimes it can be glaring. And what we want to be, if we choose to be a light to someone else, we want to be a warming and gentle light. Sometimes we have to glare. Sometimes we have to stand up for an issue and be a glaring light against abuse, against oppression, things like that. So we can be a light and we temper it according to the situation. Sometimes we must warm and sometimes we must glare. And then there's blocking the light. Blocking the light. Poem by Edward Lytton. Alas, must it ever be so? Do we stand in our own light wherever we go and fight our own shadows forever? We block our own light. And the phrase, I think, that we're our own worst enemy applies here. My father, when we would be studying, reading for school, we'd start in the evening with the sun out, I guess, and then we'd just keep reading, and there'd be a light in the room. But if my dad saw that we were sitting in a certain position, he would come on, turn on another light that would actually cast light on our book. And he would say, put the light in front of you, not behind you, or you're the one making it dark. And I've always remembered that. You're the one in your own light. We often are blocking our own light about something. And we often don't see it till someone agrees to be a light to us, gently, warmly, or glaringly, and we can move out of our own light. And since we are the creators of our own meaning and creators of our own lives, we can either be a light to ourselves or not. And then, as Vilma so beautifully read, the guttering light. Did you hear that phrase from Wind in the Willows? His light began to gutter. Can't you hear his light gutter? And this little mole, so afraid because it was getting very dark and very windy and very cold, and the light, the lantern guttered, and he put it down, and he had to face this storm to go find out how Rat was all by himself with his own light. We all walk in the dark, and each of us must learn to turn on his or her own light. You've heard the phrase, the light's on, but nobody's home. You've heard the phrase? Well, when we tend our own light, it's because somebody's home. Somebody's in there, and that's our own inner light. And that's such an abstract phrase. What is that, our own inner light? But it is our responsibility to tend the life flame, the light, the truth, the knowledge that we have. He that has light within his own clear breast may sit in the center and enjoy bright day. But he that hides a dark soul and foul thoughts, benighted walks under the midday sun, himself his own dungeon. Himself his own dungeon. That's so much our responsibility. That was John Milton, for you English lovers, 1608. So what is the light that we can tend in ourselves? Sometimes, and this is a shock to some of us, we don't know it all. We simply do not know the whole situation. If I was to look in your blurbs again, or even you could share it, that you've thought something about somebody. You've had their character all read and ready, and you're either avoiding them or trusting them or whatever. You know, and then you get surprised. Then you get shocked. Then you get... What we know can't be the only light we have, because it's provisional and it's tentative, and that has to stay open. And sometimes we're going on some facts and some opinions and some prejudices, and we're a bundle of stuff. And we march along and learn. And I know this is going to sound very trite, but when I think of what the light can be, if it's not truth and knowledge, which can be so tentative, the idea of love as my guide for what I do and what I say, or it's nothing, that's the magic, and we've seen this over and over in our life. We want for courage, we want for comfort, and the root to it has been love, not courage and comfort, and not necessarily knowledge, but the commitment to love, to seek love in the situation, to bring it. It doesn't just come to us, it comes from us and with us. So I like this. I always know I'm talking to a gardener or a photographer if at any given time they know where the light is. A gardener and a photographer knows where it is. And one place, when I asked you last week, where you find that light, that guide to how to live lovingly in the next chapter, in the next moment, in the next bad news, in the next good news, in the next disappointment, in the next challenge. One of the answers, and even in emails and discussions later, is here, or a place like here for you, and in your groups where you are, to find that way to love in the middle of darkness, when your lamp gutters out and you need comfort and strength. The community of love, or the relationship of love, is one of the most beautiful places and magical places to find it. However, since the obscure we see eventually, the completely obvious takes much longer. Sometimes we're going to be in for surprises with that. And if I asked individually each of you, when did you get that kind of a reaction from loving and doing exactly what you thought was the right thing, and it didn't make it go well? It didn't make it go well. In fact, you kind of thought you had it all together, and this would be the approach, and your counselor told you to do this, and you did that, and it didn't change that other guy. It didn't change that other situation. It didn't even seem to make it. In fact, things were getting worse. And the last thought about light is that it has no guarantee that anyone else or any other person is seeing that the same way. And we don't control that. What we control is the commitment to live by that guide of love. There's no guarantee that that's going to make you love me, or you turn around in your life, or you stop over drinking, or you stop abusing, or whatever. I get to choose what I do with that, and if love needs to walk away, love needs to walk away. And if love needs to walk beside, it needs to walk beside. And if love needs to pause long enough to figure out what the heck to do, it needs to pause long enough to figure out what the heck to do. We've often talked about the word forgiveness here, and there's someone here who's really, really struggling with that. And you can disagree with me on this, and please do. There are some things that have happened in some people's lives that when you just put the word forgiveness immediately with it, it's pretty incongruous. It's a pretty big struggle to just say forgive. If forgive means say it's okay now. Say it's okay now, which is not the deeper meaning of forgiveness. But there's some things in life you have to say, I wish you no harm. It is not taking over my life to think about this, but my act of love is to walk away, to remove myself from that lack of light and love. And if ever you were to turn around and join that love and light, maybe we could work out something. But until then, my act of love is to walk away, wishing no harm, doing no harm, causing no harm, but protecting my boundary out of love. Tricky stuff to do. Those of you that are in counseling, I'm in counseling as well. Very, very hard. Forgiveness does not mean to say, I've seen the light now, and it's okay. Maybe it's never okay what happened, but I'm doing an okay thing by walking away from that and investing myself in where love is growing. Would never ask you to share that at this point, but I know myself, there are times when that's the hard, light route to take, and it's good, and it's sound, and it's healthy. The other part is to look and say, my goodness, look at all these people. I need to explore these relationships because light's going to come into my life because of you people. What a wonderful, magical thing that you're going to lighten my life, my understanding, my love by being in my life. And that's worth celebrating for the whole year. Excuse me, we were talking about New Year's resolutions last time. And the reason they fail being too difficult, too big, too dependent on others. But that one just depends on you, to explore walking in the light with folks that can increase your light, that can widen the street light so you see more than you ever did, Sometimes you'll want to say, I wish I didn't know that. Ruth, can I say this and not embarrass you tremendously? Ruth, often, Ruth and I have talked about this before. She'll be bringing some facts about things. She says, oh, do people want to know this? I say, yes, they have to, because it's true. It's true. So bring things to the light in a community that will support it. And maybe it doesn't change all the situations out there, but it grows the right thing in here. So anyway, those are the thoughts of the light. And at the beginning of this new year, when we enter our strategic planning time and everything, to be a light for each other is privilege beyond counting. So I celebrate that you're that for me, and you're that for each other. So keep on shining. I end with, he was sitting right here. Who was he last week? Leighton. Leighton reminded me of the first 2 lines of this poem, and so I add it now. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.